Hello, this is Leora Mandel on the Light of Infinite Festival, and I have the opportunity to share with you the Relationship Elixir. I like the title personally, and I'm all about helping people improve their relationships. There are so many tools, concepts, ideas, practical ways to change your relationships for the better, and that's what I love sharing with people. So today I have something that I personally think is really life-changing. It's very simple, and yet when you hear this, you'll be like, it's obvious yet so powerful. So if you hear me out. And the good news is, you do not have to wait until the end of this talk to hear the main point, because I'm about to share it with you now, and then I'm going to expand upon it. So, in any relationship that you will ever be in, there is one common denominator. There is one essential ingredient that is true about every relationship you will ever be in. And that one common denominator, that one ingredient that is in every relationship you're ever in, is also the key to the success of any relationship you're going to be in. Now, that's why I call this the relationship elixir, because it's like the secret, right? Everyone wants to know, what's the secret ingredient to my relationships that's in every single one? And that if I know how to channel it properly, I know how to use it properly, right? Then my relationships will be potentially so much better. You ready? The one common denominator that is the source of the success of every relationship that you are ever going to be in is you. Now, I know this sounds so simple, but it's actually very life-changing and powerful if you give it some thought. Because when you think about it, any relationship you will ever be in, you are half of that relationship. You make up half of any relationship you're ever in, which means that the effect of every relationship you're in has a lot to do with what you bring to that relationship. The perspective, the tools, the way you interact, who you are in that relationship affects every relationship that you are ever in. That means you also have a tremendous power of affecting every relationship that you're ever in, because you're half of every relationship you're ever going to be in. And the other reason why this is so empowering is because, especially when we're talking about relationships with other people, well, as we all know, you can't control somebody else, you can't tell someone else what to do, but you have full control over yourself. So in every relationship, you have the ability to have an effect on that relationship by the way you choose to be in that relationship, by the way you choose to respond to situations that go on in that relationship. You have the power to affect the outcome, the direction, the quality of the relationship that you are in. Now, when you think about the fact that you are the essential factor of every relationship you're ever going to have, it gives you pause to think about, are there patterns in my relationships? Do I see certain things repeating themselves in relationships that I have? And it can even be different kinds of relationships, the kinds of people I seem to be attracted to, the kinds of situations that come up in my relationships. And that might give me certain insight of realizing if I'm half of every single relationship consistently across the board, maybe there's something I'm bringing to these relationships. It could be something fantastically wonderful. I actually have a lot of love in my life. It can be certain challenges. There's a lot of drama in my life for the people that are in my life. I'm bringing a lot of what is in my relationships into them because I'm half of every relationship I'm ever going to be in, right? So the question to ask myself is, if I bring me into every relationship I'm ever going to be in, do I like it? Important question to ask ourselves. But the wonderful thing is, if my answer is yes, or if my answer is no, or somewhere in between, because I'm such an important and essential ingredient in every relationship I'm ever going to be in, I have the power to change the relationships that I'm in, because every single one contains me. So when I give it some thought, I feel like there's what I'd call 3 tiers of relationships. There's the relationship I have with myself, right? All of us have a relationship with ourselves. In fact, I spend the most time with myself every single day. We're going to talk about that. There's a relationship I have with God, and there's a relationship I have with other people. Those are the categories I like to think of relationships in. And as you see in all of those relationships, I am a big part of every single one, right? Obviously, the one I have with myself, the one I have with God, and the one I have with other people. I'm in every single one of those relationships. They all start with me. So the relationship ultimately that I have with myself flows into every other relationship that I have in my life, which is why the elixir of relationships, the essential point of focus on any relationship I'm in, is myself. And the relationship that I have with myself, because the quality of the relationship that I have with myself is actually going to affect every other relationship in my life. Now, there's many factors that contribute to the kind of relationship that I have with myself. Some of us feel like I like spending time with myself. I think I'm doing pretty well with myself. Others of us have a harder time adjusting to ourselves, but being with ourselves, having those quiet moments to really be in touch with ourselves. And there's so many different factors that contribute to wherever I am at this point in my life, the quality of the relationship I have with myself. Now, it can be the environment I grew up in, the parents I had, the siblings I had, the family constellation had an effect on how I've developed a relationship with myself. There's obviously my personality traits, my tendencies. That all has definitely a big effect on the kind of relationship over time I've developed with myself. There's the culture that I live in, the context, this time in history, right, that I've been brought into. It definitely affects the kind of relationship at this point in my life that I have with myself. And then there's situations in life. All of us have situations. Some things we've made choices that affect the kind of relationship we have with ourselves. And there's situations that were not in our control, situations that have happened to us. Everybody has them. And how we've responded to those situations affect the kind of relationship I have with myself, how I feel about myself, how I talk to myself, if I enjoy spending time with myself. Now, the beauty of the fact that the relationship I have with myself is that's just me in there. There's no one else in there. So that gives me the fullest amount of power, control to make changes. If I don't love myself, if I'm not enjoying myself, if I'm not at peace with me, and again, I bring myself into every other relationship that I'm ever going to be in, well, that's all about me. So that's really where we need to start putting our energy into developing. I need to work in developing the relationship I have with myself. And as I said, some of those factors that affect where I am today with myself, some of them, if I don't love where I am right now, that's part of what the process of therapy is all about, is helping me work through some of those challenges, whether it be the way I grew up, situations that have happened to me, the way I responded to those situations that happened to me that maybe have led me to negative thinking or destructive thinking or certain traumas, anxieties. There's so many things that can happen, obviously, that affect the quality of the relationship that I have with myself. Therapy can be very, very helpful in working and helping me work towards having a better, more at peace relationship with myself, which ultimately will filter out into having a better, more peaceful relationship with all of those people in my life. Now, we can't do therapy in half an hour. We just have a half hour here. But nonetheless, I do have what I call some key factors that I really do want to focus in on in the time that we have that will really give you a sense of how some of these factors can affect the relationship I have with myself, especially, as I said, that these factors affect every relationship that I will ever be in. So part of what I want to show you is tools for understanding the relationship I have with myself. And we already started with some of that, understanding that there's factors that until wherever I'm at in my life right now, there are so many factors that have led to the present moment, the kind of relationship I have with me. Now, understanding some of where that's come from, especially if maybe I'm not so thrilled with the relationship I have with myself, I don't enjoy spending time with myself, understanding where some of that's come from can be very helpful, but the point is to move forward. I always like to say that when you're thinking about your past, you have to think about your past the way you look through the rearview mirror when you're driving. The rearview mirror is an essential tool, and if you don't have it, you could easily get into an accident. But that tool, if you spend too long staring in that rearview mirror, the reason you're looking at that rearview mirror is because you're going to make a change in your life. You're switching lanes. You have to see what's going on around you to make a change to move forward. But if you stare at that rearview mirror way too long, you can actually get yourself into an accident. So the rearview mirror, you sort of have to glance. You're looking at it, and the point of it is, don't stay looking at it for too long, the point of it is to get some awareness, and the goal is to use that awareness to move forward. And that's how you have to look at the past of your life. That yes, it is very important to really get an awareness and understanding of some of the things in my past that may have led to where I am today in my present state. But I don't want to get stuck in the past because that can create accidents. That's not a good thing, getting stuck. The point of looking back and having this awareness is so that I can move forward. And then there's tools, right? I need tools for building a better relationship with myself. And that's just what we're going to begin to start to touch on today so that you can see the power of what I'm talking about. So if I'm talking about the tools here, I'd say the biggest aspect of what affects the quality of the relationship that I have with me is self-talk. I spend the most time with myself on any given day, right? No matter how much time I might spend with somebody else, I spend the most time with me. And throughout my day, I'm talking to myself. Now, we all talk to ourselves throughout the day. We have running commentaries going on in our minds and our heads all day. Now, some of us are more aware of the running commentary that goes on in our minds, and some of us are not quite as conscientious about what are the thoughts that are going through my head. What am I saying to myself? Now, some of us, there's percentages. Now, sometimes it definitely does depend on what's going on a given day. But there's a general flow of the kinds of conversations we have with ourselves, the kinds of thoughts that go running through our minds on a given day. And some of us tend to be more on the negative side and have thoughts that are more critical, more negative, more put-downs, more what I call weakening thoughts. And some of us are more on the strengthening thought side of things, right? Seeing the positive, encouraging thoughts. What did I do that was right? And as you can imagine, the majority of the thoughts that we have in a given day will definitely have a huge effect on how I feel about myself, the feelings that I carry with myself all day, and how I feel about myself, which is really affected by the thoughts that I have running through my head on a regular basis. Well, that's the essential core piece of, do I like myself? Do I enjoy spending time with myself? Now, take this a little bit outside of yourself, okay? Let's say there's someone else in your life, and maybe you don't have to imagine, maybe you have this. And this is a person you have to spend a lot of time with. It could be a spouse, it could be a child, it could be a coworker, it could be a parent, okay? It could be anybody, right? And if they tend to constantly be on the more critical side, there's always something to find fault with. Nothing's ever good enough. Why'd you mess up again? You're so stupid. What's wrong with you? What is wrong? Every situation is, what people are just out for themselves. A lot of negativity. I think you'd sort of recognize that you wouldn't really want to spend that much time with that kind of person, and someone who does, maybe that they're not in the healthiest place themselves. I think people like that have a constant running commentary of negativity, they drain us, and they're not the kind of people we want to spend that much time with, as opposed to a person who tends to find the positive, the good, helps calm us down, tries realistic, but still has a positive spin on life, tries to see good situations in the good, because there's always a mix of everything in life. It's never going to be all one way or the other. It's just more a matter of what do I choose to focus on. That's just the truth, because I think we all can say there's plenty of people we know that have a lot of challenges in life, and we would totally understand if they spent most of their time complaining, and somehow they're pretty positive. And there's people that have a pretty decent life, but there's always some drama or some challenge or some terrible thing going on. So it's not always about what's actually happening, but it's a matter of what do I choose to focus on. And people like that in our lives, I think most of us want to spend time with people who are generally positive and seeing the positive and the good most of the time. So if I recognize that the kind of person I'd want to spend time with, well, I need to become the kind of person I want to spend time with, because I spend the most time with myself, right? And as I said, this is part of the context of this, is that I bring myself into every relationship I'm ever in. But starting with myself, if I am the kind of person with myself that I spend the most time with myself, so therefore I want to have the kind of thoughts that in general are kind of thoughts that if I was spending a lot of time with somebody, the kinds of things they'd say would be the kinds of things I'd want to be around. I have to start working on creating that within myself. And I think for a lot of us, the way we speak to ourselves, if someone spoke to us that way, we'd say that's not okay. I hope most of us would have the self-respect to say, that's not okay. You shouldn't be speaking to me that way. And ironically enough, so many of us speak to us ourselves in ways that we wouldn't be okay with. We wouldn't find it acceptable. Or if anything, if we didn't have the strength to say that's not okay, but we would just feel really, I don't want to spend time with this person. I don't feel all that great after spending time with them. So that's not the kind of person I want to be, because I spend the most time with me. So give some thought into, again, this powerful life-changing point, just this recognition. Now, everything I'm saying here is sort of obvious, Like, it's not the craziest thought to realize I spend the most time with myself on any given day. But I don't know that most of us have really thought about it the way I'm presenting it to you. And that's why, to me, I find this idea so life-changing, because when you do give it some thought, you might really, after hearing this, be like, wow, I want to enjoy myself. I have to sort of become more aware of the thoughts that are going on in my head. And that's the first step, awareness. Because so many of us aren't actually aware of the kinds of thoughts that are running through our head on a regular basis. We may have more of an awareness of feelings, like I just don't feel good, I feel down, I feel depressed, I feel anxious. But the feelings that we have are coming from somewhere. They're not coming from nowhere. Now granted, and I do have to put this out there, there definitely are some people who have a biochemical imbalance that can affect their moods, depression, anxiety. But that's what I'd say, and that exists, and it's important to put out there, and that might be a different issue. Obviously, though, it's also contributed, which is why, that's a caveat, even those who need medications to help balance that out, therapy is a very essential part, because it's not usually only a biochemical imbalance. There's also what I'm talking about, which has to be worked on, is the way I talk to myself. The things that I say, how I perceive what's going on in my life, that has a huge effect on how I feel. So the first step is awareness, and sometimes the awareness is, I may feel anxious. Well, where is that anxiety coming from? There's a thought. There's a running commentary that was going through my mind about some situation, that the way I'm thinking about it is creating that emotion, is creating that feeling. So a lot of times we don't take that step back, and I may recognize I'm feeling upset, I'm feeling frustrated, I'm angry, I'm really annoyed, I'm anxious, I'm worried, I'm just feeling like hopeless. We may be a little bit more in touch sometimes with those feelings, but recognize and start becoming more aware of there's a thought that came before that feeling, and the way I think, especially the way I think on a general basis, will affect how I feel. So the step one of awareness is sometimes we need to do what I call thought check-ins. And this, you have to start practicing this, because if you're not used to it, it does take some getting used to. So a thought check-in is not anything specific going on. Just, you have to start throughout your day, pause and start being aware. Take a pause and be aware, what am I thinking about right now? Start getting used to spending time with yourself. I think so often we're so distracted. Even when we're by ourselves, we're distracting ourselves. We're listening to something, which is okay sometimes, but you need to also learn how to stop. Even you're washing dishes, start paying attention. It's like this, metacognition of, I need to be aware of my awareness, aware of my thought process. Because the more you do this, the more you'll get in touch with what are these thoughts that are constantly running through my head, right? What are these messages that I'm giving to myself by the way I'm thinking? And the way to start becoming aware is you have to actually thought check-ins, pause, and then recognize that you have a choice about how you think. No one's forcing you to think a certain way. Once you're aware of what your thoughts are, you can then say, is this how I want to think? Do I want to spend time with myself when my mind is thinking these thoughts? And if the answer is no, then you can change your thought. Now, sometimes you need help. There's coaches out there. There's therapists. Sometimes this is a process, but even recognizing what I'm talking about, having the awareness of this process, I think can be so life-changing. Recognizing that you can choose the thoughts that you have in your head. If a thought is, especially, look, in other relationships that we have with people, we can choose how we're going to respond to other people. And I know right now, for this, because we only have a half hour, when I'm talking about all relationships, I'm really focusing on the relationship you have with yourself, because I see that as so essential in how it affects every other relationship that you're in. But reality is, in other relationships, people will act in ways that we didn't choose. They'll say things to ourselves, to me. Someone will say something to me that I didn't choose. Now, I can choose how I choose to think about what they said, how I choose to respond, which is, again, as I said, I'm half of every relationship. So I have a lot of power, even in the relationships, that I do not have full control over, because I can still make choices. But the relationship I have the most control over is the relationship I have with myself. So take that power and use it to your benefit. Be aware of the thoughts that you have. Change the thoughts that you don't like, that are keeping you company throughout the day and maybe not making you feel as great as you'd like. You have the power to think, who's the kind of person I want to spend time with? Start having thoughts and conversations that you'd want to be having with yourself. And then the next step is, as we said, the thoughts create feelings. But the next step is that our feelings, right? So if I'm feeling upset or down or happy or good, pause and say, what is the thought that led to this feeling? Now, it's important to know negative emotions are okay. Sometimes we don't like feeling down. And on the one hand, I'm really emphasizing the idea as I can choose the thoughts I have, and if I don't want to feel down, then think about something positive. But there is a time and a place, and this is important to put out there. There is a time and a place for emotions that are painful, because you have to allow yourself to feel pain. You have to sometimes allow yourself to feel upset. There's nothing wrong with that feeling, and if we fight against it, it often gets stronger. I can give place to it. But then I am still choosing, but how am I responding to that feeling, right? I may feel upset right now. Am I encouraging that upset feeling to make it worse, fanning the flames, so to speak, and making that fire bigger by the thoughts that I'm having about it? Or am I comforting myself? Am I saying, guess what? This was upsetting. It makes sense that you're upset. It makes sense I'm upset right now. This was an upsetting situation, and I am okay allowing myself to feel upset right now. And, I'd like to feel better, and soon I'm going to do some things for myself that help me feel better. Maybe I'll do some yoga. Maybe I'll go take a walk. Those are things that, everyone figure out what helps me feel better. But right now I'm just going to let myself be upset because this was upsetting. And do I comfort myself? Do I give myself space and time for that? So even when it comes to, there's a time and a place for some of those what I'd call negative emotions. They're an important part of the human experience. We shouldn't be running away from them. But how do I respond to them when they're happening? So we have the situation that, as I'm sharing here, that thoughts create feelings, right? The next step is that the thoughts that I have also lead to speech and action, right? First, I think something, then I say something. Anything that comes out of my mouth, it was the thought first that preceded it, right? It just doesn't come from nowhere. Now, there happens to be that there is a space between a thought that I have and something that I say or something that I do. Now, for many of us, sometimes that space feels like, especially people who have anger control challenges, and people who work in anger control management, there's tools that can help a person increase that space. Sometimes it feels like there isn't any space. It's just like, we don't even realize it was a thought that led to that speech or that action. But it happens to be there is a space between a thought that I have and something that I say. And sometimes we need to increase that space. Even by a few seconds can make a big difference. Someone shared with me a story, and I do not know where it's from, but I thought it was a great story, so I'm going to share it with you on this. There was a woman who had real challenge with her temper, and she was constantly losing it with her husband, her kids. She just had a short fuse, and it got to the point she realized this was causing her so much damage that she went to her rabbi and said, I really need some help here. I'm just yelling all the time, and I don't like the kind of person that I am. So the rabbi said, well, guess what? You came to the right place because I have something that I've used in the past. It's absolutely fantastic. There's these special drops that put on your tongue anytime you feel like you're getting angry, feel like you're about to lose it. You have to put 3 drops on your tongue and wait 5 seconds, and it just has this unbelievable effect to help a person calm down. I've had so much success with this. Try this and come back to me in a few weeks and let me know how it's working for you. So the woman is very hopeful because she really needed some help here. And so she takes these drops, and every time she gets really upset, she remembers, I have something that's going to help. So she puts 3 drops on her mouth, and she remembers she has to count to 5. And she realizes it's really quite amazing. Things are calming down. Now, sometimes she might still be upset, but she realizes even when she's upset, it's not as intense or as bad as it was before she started taking these drops. And she thinks it's just so fantastic. This is just working so well. And so she goes back to the rabbi and she says, Rabbi, I need to know what is in these drops. Like, it's just working so well. I mean, my husband's happier, my kids are happier. I just feel better about myself because it was really bothering me how I just lose it so often. And the rabbi said, I'll tell you what the secret is. He says, the secret is the space, the time it took you. Meaning there was absolutely nothing special in the drops. It was water with a little bit of flavoring. He says, but what the drops basically did is it forced her to wait 5 seconds before she'd respond. And that was the magic. The drops was just a little bit of a conduit. The rabbi's a smart man. He knew if he told her just wait 5 seconds before you respond, it's hard to do that. So taking those drops and counting to 5 had that effect. But that's what it was all about. So increasing the space sometimes between a thought that we might have and then our speech or how we're going to respond to a situation sometimes can make all the difference. Now, this goes back to what I said earlier, because how can we increase that space? Well, the more you work on being aware of the thoughts that you have, and again, not when you're upset, just throughout the day, nothing special going on, the more you will have that awareness, the more you'll start being able to have the ability, because you're tuned into yourself more, to create a space to give thought, to say, as I said, this is the thought I have of being really angry and feeling I just want to yell and scream. But is that the kind of person that I want to be? No, what could be a different thought? And again, I know this is a lot of work and this can be a journey, but it can be done. And I'm just throwing it out there just to realize that there are things we can do to become more the kind of person that I want to be, I want to spend time with. And it then ultimately filters out and affects all of the relationships that I am in. Now, when I talk about a thought precedes speech, right? So we don't always think about the power of the way we express ourselves and how that has an effect on ourselves and those around us. Now this is one last tool I really want to give you in the last few minutes that I think is also really life-changing, is what I call positive versus negative speech. Positive speech is when I say what I want, and negative speech is when I say what I don't want. And so many of us speak in the negative. I don't want you to be late. I don't want to lose it. I don't want you to yell and scream. We say what we don't want. Now, the reason why we say what we don't want is because we think in the negative, all the things I don't want to happen. Now, the problem with thinking in negative language instead of positive language is it creates an internal negative atmosphere within myself. It then comes out in language that's negative, that it creates a negative atmosphere around me and affects the relationships that I'm in a more negative way. Now, ironically enough, usually negative language isn't very helpful because it's not so specific. It's all the things I don't want. It's much more specific to say what I do want. I want to stay calm. I want the dishes put in the sink when you're finished eating, as opposed to don't leave a mess. That's very general, right? Instead of saying don't be late, I'd like you to be home at 6 o'clock for dinner. It's a whole different tone of atmosphere you create with positive language. But again, it also, as I'm saying right now, we're focusing on ourselves. When I speak in the positive, that means I'm thinking in the positive. That means I'm thinking, what do I want? And if you start asking yourself this question, what do I want? What will make me happy? So often, so many of us are so aware of what we don't want and what upsets us, and not as clear about what it is that I do want in my life. What do I want for myself? What makes me happy inside? It's so much easier, unfortunately, sometimes to focus on the negative. There's something called the negativity bias that naturally we're wired to see the negative, think in the negative, and focus on the negative. But as I'm saying here, again, what's so important is I spend the most time with myself. If I'm speaking negatively in the negative, that means I'm thinking in the negative, which is creating a negative atmosphere inside of myself. It's pouring out into those around me. So I need to make this switch, and I really became aware of this. Actually, it was a parenting book once that I read this in, is saying everything in the positive. And this is another thing you can start to work on, is catch yourself in negative speech, which starts in negative thinking. And then I say negative thinking, not just that things are going to go wrong, even good things, right? Like I don't want to be late. That's a negative thought, as opposed to what do I want? I want to be on time. The more you can create a sense of positive language, it creates positive thinking. So it starts actually opposite. It starts with positive thinking. I want to be on time. It creates an internal state of it's specific, it's clear, and it's a positive environment that's happening inside of myself. And then that filters out into the way I speak, which affects everybody around me. So I really tried to give you, I think, a lot in this half hour. There's so much more to say. There's so much more to develop. But the essential thing, and I'll go back as I started at the beginning with the main point, the relationship elixir, the essential ingredient in any relationship that you will ever be in is yourself. And the key to the success, the joy, and the happiness that every relationship potentially holds is me creating a more positive environment within myself, a more positive relationship with myself, more positive thoughts, more positive feelings, more positive actions and thought that evolve from that, and speech. That all comes out from me when I'm in a good place with myself. So start working on developing the kind of relationship that you want to have with yourself so that you can enjoy your company since you spend the most time with yourself every single day. And watch how that will affect the rest of the relationships that you're in. Thank you so much for joining me today, Leora Mandel, on the Infinite Light Festival.